General Hospital spoilers for the upcoming 3 weeks, August 25th to September 12th, hint that a potential Nathan West mystery is lurking, as well as some serious danger for Drew Kane. Some Professor Henry Hank Dalton project details are also trickling out, so here's what GH fans may expect. The week of August 25th to 29th will see Jason Morgan put pressure on Britt Westbourne to quit the Five Poppies resort, but she will continue to oppose the idea. Back in Port Charles, Maxie Jones' coma will leave her loved ones devastated, while Alexis Davis rages at Drew over a restraining order. Molly Lansing Davis will also receive beautiful updates from Cody Bell and press Christina Corinthos Davis for details on her Ava Jerome seduction plot. While Christina is backed into a corner, Giovanni Gio Palmieri will finally begin to bond with Dante Falconeri, thanks to Marco Rios' advice. Sonny Corinthos will also give someone a pep talk, and we'll see if ADA Justine Turner is the recipient. Portia Robinson will also see something infuriating, which might be Jordan Ashford cozying up to Curtis Ashford or Drew making another terrible move instead. Drew will continue to exploit Willow Tate, who appears to be willing to make a deal with him in exchange for the return of her children. Drew will eventually spark a fire under Michael Corinthos, or at least try to do so in the aftermath of Willow's offer. When Trina Robinson discovers something frightening, she will turn to Kai Taylor for assistance. Will Kai realize Drew is wicked and finally turn against him to help Trina's family? Drew should face further issues from September 1st to 5th because he has created so many bitter opponents in Port Charles. If someone tries to wipe Drew off the map, he may find himself at the center of a massive mystery. As for Jason, with the shocking news from the Five Poppies resort, he may have to step up and defend Jocelyn alongside Vaughn. Will Britt assist Jason in saving Vaughn and Jocelyn in a time of crisis? There may be some surprises about Professor Dalton's research effort between September 8th and 12th. The mysterious boss has yet to be disclosed, but this could change shortly. Could the show be run by Peter August? How does Ryan Paevey's return fit into all of this? If Nathan is in command, he may come across as a villain. If Peter has changed his looks to look like Nathan, there could be a cloning or impersonation scheme. Whatever the case, there has been no confirmation on who Paevey would portray, but he is most certainly involved in this twisted endeavor that Dalton, Britt, and Jen Sidwell are all involved in. General Hospital spoilers predict the following 3 weeks will be plenty with surprises, so stay tuned. Drew is more vile than ever, according to General Hospital weekly spoilers for August 25th to 29th, 2025, while Jason and Britt negotiate confusing feelings and adventure. Alexis in the Warpath. Is there a more horrible character in soap operas than predatory Congressman Drew Kane? Probably not. This week, he puts Alexis Davis into a total spiral when he issues a restraining order prohibiting her from visiting poor little Scout Kane. This comes after he previously told Alexis that Sam McCall's wishes were irrelevant because she had died. Alexis loses it with Drew, and understandably so. She intends to fight him to the bitter end, including a battle for Scout's custody. She has some legitimate reasons to fight, but perhaps someone will shoot him first and save Alexis the effort. While Alexis prepares to sink her fangs into Drew, Willow Tate makes an offer, and Drew turns on Michael Corinthos. Britt's moment of truth? Britt Westbourne arrives at Jason Morgan's room in her resort wear, looking seductive and eager to talk. Jason has a request for Britt, but will she give it? Neither of them realizes Jocelyn Jax is close, and Pascal is prepared to kill her. How will Jocelyn get herself out of this situation? Back in Port Charles, Jack Brennan is conflicted when he is with Carly Spencer. He knows he can't tell her the truth about Jocelyn, but does he have any option at this point? General Hospital weekly spoilers. Drew Kane sinks even lower, danger in Croatia. Port Charles odds and ends. Lucas Jones is forced to give unpleasant news to Maxie Jones. Cody Bell finds himself opening up to Dante Falconeri following the events with Ava Jerome and Molly Lansing Davis. Later this week, Molly confronts Christina Corinthos Davis. Brooke Lynn Quartermain is encouraged as she observes Dante making progress with Gio Palmieri. Trina Robinson swallows her pride and turns to Kai Taylor for assistance, while Stella Henry is concerned about her independence. The autumn wind howled through Cambridge, Massachusetts' small streets, bringing with it the aroma of moist leaves and the faint promise of rain. Nathan Drew, a lanky doctoral student who enjoys solving problems, straightened his scarf and hurried into the university's vast library. His dark hair flowed haphazardly over his brow, and his hazel eyes surveyed the horizon, fearful of shadows that appeared to stay too long in the corners of his vision. For weeks, he had felt it, a creeping sense of being watched, a subtle pressure that made his skin prickle. He assured himself that it was not paranoia, despite the fact that his friends had begun to mock him about his jumpiness. Nathan wasn't the kind to jump at shadows, but the more he dug into Professor Dalton's esoteric studies, the more he felt like a mouse in a labyrinth, with a predator lurking just out of sight. The library loomed ahead, its Gothic arches lit by the mellow glow of street lamps. Nathan's sneakers rattled on the wet cobblestones as he climbed the stairs, his knapsack stuffed with notebooks and a broken laptop. Inside, the air was warm and smelled like old paper and polished wood. He nodded to the librarian, Mrs. Hargrove, who hardly looked up from her crossword puzzle, and proceeded to the rare manuscripts department. It was a kind of haven, a place where he could lose himself in the maze of knowledge and ignore the discomfort that clung to him like a second skin. Tonight, however, his mission was specific. A journal Professor Dalton had mentioned in passing during one of their late-night discussions, a leather-bound volume tucked away in the archives, allegedly containing clues to the professor's secretive project revelations. Nathan had been Professor Dalton's research assistant for nearly a year, a position that had thrust him into a world of esoteric theories and clandestine meetings. Dalton, a wiry guy in his late 50s with a shock of white hair and eyes that appeared to see past time itself, was a legend in academia. His courses on theoretical physics and ancient cryptography were packed, but Nathan was most interested in his private work. Project Revelations, as Dalton dubbed it, was a hazy endeavor shrouded in vague references to unlocking the unseen and bridging the known and unknown. Nathan had pieced together fragments, references to quantum entanglement, ancient texts, and something called the Ecliptic Codex, but the full scope remained elusive, like a half-remembered dream. The rare manuscripts area was dimly lighted, with long tables unoccupied but for one lamp throwing a pool of light. Nathan laid his suitcase down and approached the archive catalog, his fingers racing across the keyboard as he looked for the journal. The system was outdated, cumbersome, and prone to freezing, but after a few painful minutes, he discovered it, Journal of E. R. Dalton, 1998 to 2000, restricted access. His heartbeat quickened. Restricted access meant he'd need special permission, but Dalton had given him a handwritten note months ago, a crumpled slip of paper granting him access to any materials pertinent to the project. Nathan took the note from his wallet, its edges worn from constant handling, and walked to Mrs. Hargrove's desk, where she was now drinking tea. "Restricted, right?" she responded, looking at the note through her bifocals. Her tone was suspicious, but she stamped the request form and gave him the key to the locked stacks. "Nathan, don't create a mess down there. And don't remain past closing time." He agreed not to, even though he knew he'd lose track of time. The stacks were a maze of narrow alleys and high shelves, and the air was thick with the musty odor of old paper. Nathan discovered the journal on a high shelf, with its leather cover damaged but intact. He moved it to the table, his hands quivering slightly as he opened it. Dalton's spidery handwriting was scattered throughout the pages, along with designs of interlocking rings, equations that appeared to be from a quantum physics textbook, and mysterious Latin phrases. One page piqued his interest, a depiction of a star map with the words "The ecliptic opens the gate" written beneath it. Nathan's pulse quickened. This was it, the key to understanding Project Revelations. As he read, the library became quieter, with the silence pressing on his ears. He flipped to a later entry, one from right before Dalton's inexplicable 2-year absence. The professor had written about a breakthrough, something about a resonance frequency that could align the codex with the stars. But the tone of the article was frenetic, even paranoid, with cautions about those who watch from the edges. Nathan frowned, his prior disquiet returning. He'd heard Dalton use the term watchers before, dismissing it as a metaphor for skepticism or institutional oversight, but the words on the page were more literal, more threatening. A tiny groan shattered the silence, causing Nathan's head to jolt up. The sound came from the stacks, a quiet shuffle similar to footsteps on aged carpet. He held his breath and listened. Nothing. He persuaded himself it was only the library settling. But the feeling of being watched became more intense, like a weight on his chest. He closed the journal and placed it in his luggage, intending to photocopy the necessary pages later. As he stood, the bulb flickered, creating dark shadows over the room. His gaze flew to the aisles, where the blackness appeared to move, almost as if it were alive. Nathan's phone vibrated, shocking him. A text message from an unknown number says, "Stop digging or you'll regret it." His stomach sank. He peered at the screen, his hand lingering over the respond button, but then another message appeared, "They're closer than you realize." He swung around, almost expecting to find someone standing behind him, but the room was empty. His heart hammered as he shoved his phone into his pocket and reached for his backpack. He wanted to get outside, clear his mind, and find out what was going on. The main hall of the library was abandoned as he ran for the exit, his footsteps echoing too loudly in the huge room. Outside, the wind was picking up, beating his scarf across his face. He looked over his shoulder, checking the shadows, but found no one. The campus was silent, with the typical bustle of students replaced by an unnerving silence. Nathan's flat was a 15-minute walk away, but he felt unsafe on the open streets. He darted down a tight alley, a shortcut he'd used numerous times, but tonight it felt like a trap waiting to spring. He heard it halfway down the alley, a quiet scratch, like to leather soles on pavement. He froze, his breath caught in his throat. The roar ceased, but the air seemed electrified and dangerous. He turned slowly, his eyes strained in the low light. A figure stood at the far end of the alley, shrouded in shade, too far to see details but close enough to send shivers down his spine. Nathan's instincts told him to run, but his legs felt fixed to the ground. The figure took a step forward, and Nathan sprinted, his sneakers hammering against the wet pavement. He didn't stop till he reached his flat, fumbling with his keys and locking the door behind him. His hands shook as he withdrew the journal from his luggage and spread it out on his desk. The pages appeared to throb with secrets, each word a thread in a tapestry he was only beginning to comprehend. He spent hours copying notes, comparing Dalton's cryptic sentences to works on astronomy, quantum mechanics, and ancient mysticism. The Ecliptic Codex, he discovered, was reputed to be a powerful treasure, a star chart that may reveal secret universes or energies. Dalton's work suggested he discovered it, or at least a technique to harness its power. Nathan's eyes were burning from exhaustion by daylight, but he had come up with a theory. Project Revelations was more than just a theory, it was an attempt to activate the Codex and harness its resonance frequency to bridge the physical and spiritual worlds. But, why the secrecy? Who were the watchers that Dalton was afraid of? The menacing letters ran back in Nathan's head, each word a warning he couldn't ignore. He needed to find Dalton, who had been unavailable since his sabbatical started. The professor's last known location was a research center in New Mexico, which Nathan had only heard of in whispers. He booked a flight for the following morning with the last of his savings. The decision seemed dangerous, but sitting motionless was not an option. If Dalton was in trouble, or if Nathan himself was the focus of whatever forces were closing in, he needed an explanation. The journey was a whirl of turbulence and racing thoughts, and by the time he landed in Albuquerque, the weight of his mission was bearing down on his shoulders. He leased a car and drove to the facility, an isolated compound situated in the desert, with the coordinates scribbled in the margins of Dalton's journal. The facility was a low concrete structure encircled by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. It seemed abandoned, with dark windows and rusting gates. Nathan parked safely away and approached on foot, his pulse pounding as he searched for signs of life. The air was dry, the heat was relentless, and the silence was broken only by the distant screech of a hawk. He slid through a crack in the fence, his sneakers kicking up dust as he approached the main entrance. He pushed open the unlocked door, which creaked. Inside, the air was stuffy, and the corridors were lined with peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lighting. Papers littered the floor, some with the same enigmatic symbols he had seen in Dalton's journal. Nathan's footsteps echoed as he moved further, following a trail of clues, a handwritten note here, a diagram there, until he came to a massive steel door labeled restricted. His hands shook as he pushed it open, revealing a laboratory unlike anything he'd ever seen. The chamber was dominated by a gigantic circular apparatus with etched star patterns and a faint shimmer of alien light. In the center was an empty pedestal, clearly intended to house something important, perhaps the codex. A rumbling behind him caused Nathan to swivel around. A man stood in the doorway, his face hidden behind a cowl, his voice low and intimidating. "You shouldn't be here, Drew." Nathan's blood turned cold. He recognized the voice from a fleeting memory, a guest speaker who had attended Dalton's class and whom the professor had appeared afraid about. Before Nathan could react, the man attacked, and Nathan ducked behind a table, his thoughts racing for an escape. The lab was a jungle of apparatus, but he noticed a side entrance and dashed toward it, the man's footsteps echoing behind him. The chase took him outside, into the blazing desert heat. Nathan sprinted till his lungs hurt, darting between scrub brush and rocky outcrops. He wasn't sure if he had lost his pursuer or if the man was still out there, watching. He only knew that he couldn't stop. The Codex, Project Revelations, and the Watchers were all linked, and Nathan was delving deeper than he'd ever thought. He had to find Dalton and discover the truth before it destroyed him. Days passed into weeks as Nathan followed leads throughout the country, each one bringing him closer to the truth of the mystery. He discovered bits of the Codex's past, including stories about ancient astronomers who guarded its secrets and civilizations that killed to keep it hidden. He discovered that Dalton had been working with a small group of researchers, all of whom had vanished or been silent. The observers, whatever they were, appeared to be everywhere and nowhere, making their presence known through anonymous threats and fleeting glimpses of people in the darkness. Nathan's life turned into a flurry of motels, burner phones, and coded communications. He became slimmer, his eyes clouded with tiredness, yet his determination never faltered. He broke into databases, decrypted encrypted files, and put together Dalton's last days. The professor had come close to discovering a means to activate the Codex and unleash its power. But things had gone dreadfully wrong. Nathan discovered a video file kept on a secure server, which showed Dalton in the desert lab, his face pale and drawn as he spoke of tearing the veil and facing the consequences. The video abruptly ended, leaving Nathan with more questions than answers. In a little Nevada town, Nathan finally located a solid lead, a retired scientist who had worked with Dalton decades before. The man, Dr. Evelyn Carter, resided in a little house surrounded by sagebrush, her eyes bright despite her age. She listened to Nathan's story, her expression unreadable, before handing him a small metal box. Inside was a remnant of the Ecliptic Codex, a chunk of stone with star designs that glowed faintly in the light. "Dalton trusted you," she explained. "Don't make his mistake." Nathan spent evenings analyzing the shard, which felt warm to the touch and seemed to be alive. He cross-referenced it with Dalton's diary to figure out the resonance frequency the professor stated. The sound and vibration aligned the codex with the stars, opening a passage to another dimension? A concealed truth? Nathan had no idea, but he felt the weight of history bear down on him, the lives lost to safeguard or destroy this secret. The Watchers discovered him again in Colorado, this time in a nocturnal ambush that left him beaten and bloodied. He fled, but not before they got the fragment. Nathan's grief was mitigated by a realization: the codex signified knowledge, not just the stone itself. Dalton's logbook contained the final piece, a set of coordinates pointing to an observatory in the Rockies. Nathan traveled through the night, guided only by his notebook, until he arrived at the distant institution. The observatory was old, with a corroded dome but still working. Inside, Nathan discovered Dalton, or what remained of him. The professor sat slumped in his chair, his eyes lifeless and his hands grasping a star chart. He was alive, but barely, his psyche shattered by what he had witnessed. Nathan knelt beside him, tears burning his eyes as he begged for an explanation. Dalton spoke in a whisper, his words fragmented but desperate. "The gate is open, they're coming." Before Nathan could question further, the room flooded with blinding, frigid light. The air was alive with electricity, and the star chart in Dalton's hands began to sparkle. Nathan's eyesight dimmed, and his body became weightless as the world around him disappeared. He saw stars not as distant points of light, but as living things whose patterns changed to build a gate. Beyond it, shapes shifted, inhuman, huge, and inexplicable. Nathan yelled, but no sound came. The spectators were not men, but something else, and their presence violated reality itself. When Nathan awoke, he was alone in the observatory, the star chart burned to ash, and Dalton was gone. His phone rang with a final message, "You have been warned." He stumbled outside, the night sky huge and indifferent. Nathan understood that the Codex, Project Revelations, and the Watchers would never leave him alone. But he also realized he couldn't stop. The truth was far too important and dangerous to keep hidden. He'd find the Codex or perish trying, because some mysteries were priceless. Drew paced in his penthouse, his jaw set tight and hands clenched as the weight of everything he'd done and planned to do pressed down on him. The wrath boiled beneath the surface, but there was also a cold calculation, a determination that would not back down no matter how deadly the next step was. Croatia wasn't just any random location, here was where the strands of betrayal had begun to unravel, and the next phase of his plan would either bring him redemption or destroy him utterly. Michael's admonition resonated in his ears, the words harsh and deliberate. Michael had been cautious, attempting to reason with him and persuade him to back off before crossing a line from which he could not recover. But Drew had stopped listening weeks before. Every transaction he'd made, every connection he'd formed, had brought him closer to this moment. If Sonny thought he was untouchable, and Jason believed he could dominate the board, they were about to discover how far Drew Kane could go when pushed to his limits. He had already set the pieces in action. The people of Croatia had no idea who they were dealing with, they assumed they were making a deal with a desperate man looking for leverage. What they didn't comprehend was that Drew had no intention of fulfilling his commitments. He was not there to bargain, he was there to win. Meanwhile, across town, Willow sat on the couch, her hands quivering as she grasped a mug she had neglected to drink from. The atmosphere in the house had been terrible since Michael's most recent altercation with Drew. She could see the storm gathering in Michael's eyes, which worried her. He'd always been protective, but this was no longer about family, it was about survival. Michael had learned enough to understand that if Drew made the wrong decision in Croatia, it would be more than just his life at stake. The ripple effect would send them all into pandemonium, with no easy way out. At the same time, Jason had already implemented his own defenses. He wasn't going to allow Drew walk into a scenario without assistance, not because he was concerned about Drew's safety, but because he understood what would happen if Drew's plan failed. Jason understood better than anyone else the types of people Drew was working with abroad. Croatian territory was more than just smuggling routes, it was also about control, allegiance, and power plays that were more complex than anyone on the outside recognized. Drew would not only be putting himself in danger if he made a mistake, but he would also be opening the door to opponents they had spent years attempting to keep at bay. But Drew didn't mind. He had long since ceased caring about what was right and wrong. The only thing that mattered now was to make them all pay, including Sonny, Jason, and, if necessary, Michael. Everyone felt they understood him and could predict his next move, but they were mistaken. Drew sat in silence on the journey to Dubrovnik, peering out at the clouds as the engine's hum filled the cabin. He wasn't nervous, but the tension was palpable, a gnawing reminder that once he stepped off the plane, there was no turning back. His contacts were waiting at a safe location outside the city, and they'd already gotten him what he needed: knowledge, weapons, and the one piece of leverage no one in Port Charles knew about. Drew was intended to trade access to encrypted accounts related to Sonny's offshore operations for ownership of a shipping line that spanned from the Adriatic coast to Eastern Europe. What Sonny didn't realize was that Drew had already inserted fake information in the system, setting up a trap that would expose him. However, Drew had not expected one complication: someone else was observing him. Back in Port Charles, Carly had begun putting pieces together on her own. She knew Drew better than most people did, and she could tell when he was about to do something reckless. She'd overheard enough discussions and seen enough encrypted messages on his phone to conclude that what was going on in Croatia was more than just business. Carly wasn't sure whether to alert Sonny or remain silent. A part of her still wanted to believe Drew could be saved, but she knew better. By the time Drew arrived in Dubrovnik, the air was thick with anxiety. His connections were already on edge, hinting of a power shift in the Croatian syndicate. The man he was going to meet, Luka Dragan, had built his empire on blood and betrayal, and Drew was well aware of the dangers of trying to outmaneuver him. However, this was no longer about gaining power, it was for survival. The safe house was tucked away on a quiet hillside overlooking the coast, but the atmosphere inside was anything but serene. Luka's guys were armed, distrustful, and extremely impatient. Drew presented the encrypted files and explained his approach, but Luka was not impressed. He needed more: leverage, guarantees, and proof that Drew could keep his promises. Drew executed his most daring move yet. He provided Luka just enough knowledge about Sonny's network to spark a fight at home without totally exposing his hand. Drew was unaware that someone had followed him from Port Charles. Jason had arrived in Croatia the night before, following Drew's activities via his own contacts. He'd remained concealed until now, observing from afar, but when he saw Luka's men closing in on Drew, he realized the situation was deteriorating. Jason walked out of the shadows, revolver drawn, but Drew was not pleased. "You shouldn't be here," Drew growled, clenching his jaw. "Neither should you," Jason said, keeping his voice low but steady. "You have no idea what you're walking into." "I know exactly what I'm walking into," Drew answered coldly. "This is the only way to bring Sonny down. You're either with me or in my way." Jason looked at him for a long time, his expression opaque, before shaking his head. "You are going to get yourself killed. And you'll bring everyone else down with you." Back in Port Charles, Sonny began to piece things together. Brick had caught pieces of conversation between Luka's guys and someone associated with Drew's pseudonym. Sonny quickly realized Drew wasn't simply playing a deadly game, he was planning a betrayal that could cost them everything. Sonny wasn't going to let that happen. He told Dex to gather a crew, but by the time they were ready to deploy, Drew and Jason were already deep in enemy territory. Inside the safe home, tensions rose. Luka's second-in-command accused Drew of lying, and weapons were pulled on both sides. Jason attempted to maintain control, but Drew refused to back down. He supplied just enough information about Sonny's offshore accounts to keep Luka intrigued, but the situation became even more heated. One incorrect remark or move, and the entire room could have erupted in bloodshed. Suddenly, footsteps outside broke through the pandemonium. Luka's competitors had come, tipped off by someone within his own group. The safe house was surrounded in minutes, and Drew understood too late that he had been set up. Jason grabbed Drew's arm, forcing him toward the back exit, but Drew paused. "I'm not leaving without finishing this," Drew yelled, his voice harsh with rage. "You don't have a choice," Jason hissed, pushing him toward the exit as gunfire erupted outside. They managed to escape into the dark forest behind the safe house, but Drew knew it wasn't over. Luka's men would pursue him, Sonny would respond, and Jason would not stop attempting to draw him back from the edge. The danger was no longer just in Croatia, it was following him home. Drew realized for the first time what he had started. There was no easy way out, no straightforward conclusion in which everyone walked away unscathed. Power plays, betrayals, and shifting alliances were all coming to a head. Drew had made his move, and now everyone he cared about was in the crossfire. Drew stood on the rocky shoreline, breathing heavily while Jason checked the perimeter as the sun set below the horizon, sending a blood-red glow across the Adriatic Sea. He could hear distant motors approaching and knew Luca's men would not stop until they got him. But instead of fear, Drew felt something very different: resolve. He was not backing down. Not now. Not ever. Because in Drew Kane's perspective, the game had only just started.